Hello, coders. Hello, welcome to episode 80 of the podcast, the How to Code Well podcast. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the things that I learnt when upgrading to Symfony 5. And this is live. This is a live stream. I've decided to try it out, trying the podcast out live. This will obviously go to the podcast, the audio podcast, after this is done on Friday. And in today's episode, I want to talk about my journey of upgrading howtocodewell.net to Symfony 5 from Symfony 4.4, the mistakes I made, the things that I learnt whilst doing this upgrade, the different environments that caused me some issues, the whole process behind the upgrade, so the different phases of doing an upgrade, which I suppose you could probably take this with any kind of framework. It doesn't have to be with Symfony. So talking about the planning phases, the research phase, the testing phases, the actual upgrade phase itself, and then obviously the deployment phase. I want to talk about some of my unforeseen changes that I had to do in order to get this upgrade working. Things that I would do again, and things that I won't do next time. So let's get cracking. First up, what is the system that I was actually working on? This is howtocodewell.net. This is the replacement of the old How to Code Well site, which was built in Symfony. It was pretty static, and I've been rebuilding this live on Twitch for the past few years. And the way we have been working on this is that I was building, obviously developing it live on Twitch using Jira and Jira tickets. Building out the features, coming up with an MVP, doing it in a sort of a scrummy, agile-y kind of way. And we then have created like a beta environment. That environment goes off to the beta testers that then test this and then report back to me. So on the Discord server, there is a beta testers channel that the beta testers will report bugs on. There's also a Trello and all sorts of other bits and pieces connected to that. So they have sort of private access to the beta site. And this is now in the second phase of beta, which is great. So they tested the first phase out, and now it's on the second phase. I should tell you about the actual application itself. That would make sense. So this is going to host all of my courses that I've created here on YouTube and elsewhere as well. And what I would eventually like to happen is to have the ability for people to subscribe and be a member of the How to Code Well community, and also access premium videos, so videos that aren't free here on YouTube. But also the thing with YouTube is that the playlists aren't particularly great, so you can't really see a whole course from start to finish very well. Obviously, the search is very sort of dotted about, isn't it? So, you could be watching tutorial 5 of a 20 tutorial part series before you see the first part. So the platform is a way of you being able to access the tutorials in the whole sort of chronological order, I guess, or not chronological, the order in which the tutorials were meant to be in, and also have access to the code as well. So it's kind of an education platform, I guess, that I'm building. It also has the blog, which is written in Ghost. We'll talk about the tech stuff in just a second, as the infrastructure side of things. So we've got a blog that's in Ghost. We've obviously got the podcast, which goes off to Anchor and Spotify and iTunes and other various places like that too. So this platform is, well, I've codenamed it the portal site. It's basically the portal to all the How to Code Well bits and pieces. Excuse me. So let's talk about the actual application in terms of the technical side of things. How is this all built up? And then I'll sort of move into the Symfony side of it as well. So this is a static site. It's built in Gatsby.js, and it's brilliant. The whole headless CMS sort of aspect to it is really good. So it's got a sort of a React front end. The CMS and the API, they are built in Symfony. Those were the two things that I upgraded to Symfony 5 from Symfony 4. It's also got, as I mentioned, a Ghost CMS for blog and other content as well. The beauty with having a headless CMS, of course, is the fact that you can deploy the CMS without having to disrupt the front end, because the front end's already been built in a static way, which is wonderful. That does bring up some other challenges as well, and we might dive into some of that today too. But the environments are that you have production, so that's the production site. That's what's currently on howtocodewell.net. Then we've got the beta site, as I mentioned. A bunch of beta testers will test that out and tell me what's broken. They'll try and break it, and successfully so. And then obviously you have the development. So what I build here live on when I'm doing it on Twitch, obviously, and I have various machines here in this office that have that website running locally that I can try various bits and pieces out. So essentially there's sort of three environments. There's also a staging environment as well, just for when things are a little bit risky and I don't want to put it to beta. I just want another environment to test. That's what I use. So we have a staging environment too. So yeah, there's a number of environments. There's a lot of tech involved. There's a lot of infrastructure. It was originally built in microservices, so I'd have a different service for, say, the course registration, or say the user management and the authentication. They would have different services with different databases. That was the original plan, and we built that on Twitch. But that got very complicated very fast, as you can probably imagine. So I've kind of moved things back into a little bit of a monolith. However, we still have that separation between the front end, the back end, as well as the Ghost CMS. It certainly isn't where it should be. And this is because of this upgrade, because I've had to take some time out to actually do the upgrade. I'm planning to do a phased release all the way up to the end of the year, at which point we'll have people being able to register and subscribe on there. So it's a very small, very sort of lightweight MVP at the moment. Okay, so I've just mentioned that we weren't planning to do the upgrade to Symfony 5. And I suppose I should talk about why I didn't plan for that. Because, Symfony 5 is, it's been out for ages. They're even thinking about Symfony 6. So Symfony 5 has been out for a very long time. Symfony 4.4 is obviously stable. Symfony 5 is stable, but this is like long-term sort of release stable. And we were working on Symfony 4 for a while, and I did a podcast a few months back talking about the roadmap of How to Code Well, the website, all the way up to the end of the year. And the upgrade to Symfony 5 wasn't on that roadmap path. I was originally just planning to build this site and then worry about the upgrades next year in 2021. And that would also include the upgrade to PHP 8 as well. So I had no intention of upgrading this. Not one bit. The packages that I was using in the CMS and the API, they were working. They were very stable, very well tested. So I was very happy, and I was, hoping to not have to worry about an upgrade for a while, because an upgrade of a system is actually very, very complicated, depending on the project that you're using, of course. So it wasn't on the roadmap, but there was also another reason why I didn't want to do an upgrade, and that was because the CMS itself, which is the system that I will use to add courses, add resources, books, that kind of stuff, and basically create the content apart from the content from Ghost, because that's coming from Ghost, but the content of the courses, the tutorials, that kind of stuff. The CMS itself wasn't actually tested. It actually didn't have any tests whatsoever on the CMS. The CMS is a system that only I will use to update those courses. It certainly isn't going to be publicly open. It's just for me. So I kind of sort of naively thought that I could get away with not having to worry about that during the upgrade. Oh boy, was I wrong. But with the knowledge of the fact that the CMS wasn't tested, it scared me a little bit into the feeling that I shouldn't be doing an upgrade because it isn't tested, because there's so many things that could go wrong, because obviously with the CMS, you've got to worry about security, you've got to worry about the twig, the actual UI, the front end of it, how the JavaScript works, the CSS is on, you have to worry about the forms, you have to worry about the authentication, the translations, all of that kind of stuff. And when you're doing a big upgrade of a framework, all of those inbuilt features may or may not change. So you're sort of left in this sort of weird place of, without the tests, you can't actually be aware of what has broken, if anything has been broken, or what has changed. So I didn't really want to do an upgrade this year because it wasn't tested. Also, another reason why I didn't want to do the upgrade is because the code coverage wasn't that great. Code coverage in terms of testing, in terms of unit testing, and acceptance testing and API testing, at the time, it wasn't that great. And so I just thought, I'll wait until next year. I'll just wait until next year. And also, to my naivety, I thought that the packages that I was using weren't ready for Symfony 5 yet, and they were being worked on. We'll get into that a little bit more, because this is kind of now moving into the needs of why I had to upgrade. So I mentioned that we have the beta site, and obviously beta is one step further than production, right? Because that's what the beta testers are testing. As soon as they're happy with it, and as soon as I fix all the bugs with it, I'll push it up to production. And then I'll work on the next phase 3, and then put that to beta, and so on, and that's the cycle. The thing is that this second phase is actually quite big, because this phase allows users to log in and create an account and view the tutorials and view the courses. The next phase after this will be something along the lines of having your own library of courses that you've seen on the website. So a way of actually storing and enrolling into courses. At the moment on production, when you select a course, you just go off to the playlist. It just directs you to the playlist on YouTube, which it certainly isn't where I want this to be, right? So the next phase, the phase that's in beta, that's the phase that's being tested at the moment, is the phase where you can actually create an account, you can log in, you can then see the tutorials from within the website. You don't go off to another YouTube and see it. You see it from within the website, and then the next phase, the phase on from that, will potentially have the ability to save and enroll the courses that you've selected on howtocodewell.net into your own account. That's kind of the way I'm sort of going through it. It's a very slow, bitty roadmap all the way up to the end of the year, where I'm hoping people will be able to access the premium courses that I have that I don't yet have on the site. So there's going to be a bit of content stocking there. But anyway, so this phase requires user authentication and authorization. There's user management involved. Very lightweight user management, but there's user management involved. And this, unfortunately, there was a bug in this. Unfortunately. And it was one of those issues. I don't really want to talk about it in its entirety and its, the complexities of it, the ins and outs of this issue, because obviously we're talking about authentication and security, and I don't want to give too much away. But this bug required me to rebuild a portion of that layer, the middleware, I suppose. And it meant that I needed to bend the will of one of the packages that I was using. The package I was using, by the way, I can talk about it now because I'm not using that package anymore, and we'll talk about that, why that is, in just a second. Was the FOSS user bundle, which is the Friends of Symphony user bundle. And there was something in there that I needed to change, and I couldn't really override it. I couldn't really sort of do anything to it without actually breaking the bundle. And this was preventing me from fixing a bug that I had. And I have naively used FOSS user bundle for many years, thinking, and at the time, quite rightly thinking that was highly maintained. Pretty much most of my projects I've had FOSS user bundle in, and I think I've used it from Symfony 1, back in the Symfony 1 days, and it's been really, really good. Really, really, really good. I've loved it. It's been such a great bundle. You slot it in, and then you've got user authentication. The thing is, I didn't realize that bundle was no longer being maintained. And it's to my own fault. This is one of my lessons that I learned. When I was looking into the documentation, because I was trying to find ways of sort of bending this bundle to my will for this particular bug, I thought, well, okay, I can't fix it. I wonder if anybody else has had a similar issue. So I went down the issues list in GitHub on this package, and I didn't find anybody with this same issue. But what I did find was a couple of issues that said that it was no longer being maintained for Symfony 5. There were people asking the maintainers questions, when will this be upgraded? Is there an upgrade path? And then reading through the conversations, people were suggesting that it wasn't being maintained, and then someone came out and outright said that it wasn't being maintained. So, and I found this through the issues. I found these deep down into the issues. When I went to the README of this bundle, there wasn't anything there. There wasn't anything there that suggested that this wasn't being maintained at all. So I was naively just thinking that this was going to be maintained, and because nobody said anything differently on the README file, that would be fine. And I stupidly thought that for probably the best part of a year. How embarrassing. How embarrassing. And I came to this conclusion the evening of publishing this to the beta site, because I wanted to fix this bug, and I was like, this needs to be fixed tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to push this up over the weekend. And I just thought, right, I'm just going to have a look through the issues lists and see if there's someone who's had the same problem as me. And then I discovered this. And then this kind of pushed me into the path of, in order for me to fix this bug, I need to remove FOSS user bundle, because I can't, there isn't anything I can do here. And then that kind of opened a huge can of worms, ginormous can of worms. Because quite rightly, people were suggesting on the issues that you should just use Symfony Guard, right? The normal way that Symfony does the user authentication. And I obviously haven't been doing that, because I've been using the FOSS user bundle, because I've naively thought that was being maintained when it wasn't, when even the maintainers were saying, just use a FOSS Guard. So the lesson here is to do the research. Just because there isn't anything on the README that says it's not being maintained doesn't mean that it's being maintained, right? So anyway, this put me into a bit of a predicament. What do? I need to fix this bug, right? But the only way I can fix this is either hacking on this bundle so badly, and because of having the knowledge that it's not going to be maintained, I can quite happily hack on it, because nobody's going to do any updates to it. So it's just, I might as well just fork it and then just hack it and happy days. Or do I do the proper thing and do I take a step back and go, right, this feature hasn't even been published yet. This isn't on production. This isn't even in beta, the user management stuff. So really I need to start from a good foundation. And I need to use code that is going to be maintained going forward. If I hack on the FOSS user bundle, that's not going to be maintained. And I'm also diverging from how Symfony 5 actually works. So I made the decision that I should, quite rightly, I think, remove FOSS user bundle, use the inbuilt Symfony guard stuff, so that would have to mean rewriting that whole section, the whole layer, which, to be honest, wasn't that difficult. And just because how great Symfony 5 is. But then at the same time, you see, I would have to do an upgrade. Because if I just removed that bundle and then wrote the stuff myself, then I would be still writing that on an old framework. So this kind of pushed me in that direction of doing the upgrade. Now, how long is a piece of string? Because I needed to get this out to beta, otherwise this would just be, hanging for so long. And one of the fears I had was, how long is this actually going to take me to do? And I couldn't really estimate the time, because I didn't really know what was involved. I didn't know what other packages would be affected by this. As I've mentioned, the CMS wasn't tested. The code coverage was actually quite bad. At that time, we were talking about 60% code coverage, which isn't great in terms of testing. So I guess for the period, about a week, I suppose, I basically just coded this in the evenings and the weekends. And I just sort of, nothing else, totally blinkered, just doing this work. After my normal freelance shift after work, I would just be solidly doing this stuff, and I'd be working well into the morning to get this done. I managed to get it upgraded. I've actually managed to get it deployed. It's on beta at the moment, which is great. But it's been a challenge. It's been an absolute challenge. With and a massive learning curve, some of which I will talk about through now. Just going down my notes. So one of the things with the 60% code coverage, I was able to pull out some deprecations, and this is, I guess, for anybody who's doing an upgrade of a system, especially PHP stuff. One thing that can really help you is to be aware of the deprecations that you have, because especially with Symfony, what they do is they deprecate things. They deprecate function calls and method calls and classes and stuff like that. And they give you a warning to say, it's going to be deprecated, and actually it is deprecated, and it's actually going to be removed in this version. So I was looking at the 60% code coverage, and I was checking the deprecations. And there was a couple of things that I needed to change. There was about 27 things that I needed to sort out. But these were all things that I didn't necessarily plan to do, right? Because my head was still, once this little bug is fixed, I would just push it up to production and off it goes. So I was really having to backpedal a lot. Excuse me, I'm just going to grab a drink. So what I did was I broke up the different stages of the upgrade, and I've called them phases, and I'll go through those now. So the first phase of an upgrade, of a framework, is to plan. Don't just suddenly jump into it and go, oh, I'll just update the Composer JSON file and run Composer update and happy days. No. So the first part is planning. Knowing what the risky parts of your system is. That is important. The risky parts for me was obviously, well, two main things. The CMS itself, that could fall flat on its face. It wasn't tested, as I mentioned. And also the actual thing that I'm having to replace that requires this upgrade to go forth. And that is the user management and user authentication layer. So big risk, big risk. Thankfully, it wasn't in production, so we will be able to sniff out the bugs when they come through. So that was the risky parts, the CMS and the user sort of authentication layer. There was also this sort of cap of time that I wanted to give myself because I didn't want to go and fall down different rabbit holes. And I wanted to ensure that this upgrade, this feature, this release should only consist of things for this upgrade. So I wasn't going to use this as an excuse to bundle this with another feature. It was just, this is going to be the upgrade. And once the upgrade's done, I would like to have this as a single commit, a single merge, wrap it up in a bow, and then push it off. I don't want this to be bundled with any other features or anything like that, because that would just be an absolute headache to unpick. As I've mentioned before in other videos, if you're doing an upgrade, you really should just focus on the upgrade and not any other features. Otherwise, if you have to do a rollback, then you have to roll back a feature or rebuild the feature to work with the old code, and that just gets a real headache. So the way I organized my branches in terms of Git was that we have the main branch, obviously, that goes off to production. We have a develop branch. This is the branch that features that aren't yet ready goes off to. We also have a beta branch that is off of beta, and that develop gets merged into beta whenever that's ready. Beta then gets merged back into the main branch when that's ready, of course, and then that goes off to prod. But with the Symfony stuff, because I just wanted to be so super careful with this upgrade, I didn't want to have any other features in this. I created a branch specifically for this upgrade. And the removal and rewrite of the FOSS user bundle. So that's how I organized. The branches. It kind of did look a little messy, but I was trying to do it very sort of very quickly. Well, not quickly, but I wanted to just have that separation between the different sort of between a feature and an upgrade, essentially, because the site is in production. If there was a bug down the road, I would need to fix that. If there was a bug whilst I was doing this upgrade, I would have to fix that in that branch, and I wanted that completely separate to the branch that I was working in. So there was a couple of things that I needed to do before the upgrade, and that was sort of doing that organization, doing some planning, some risk assessments. But also, I really wanted to get the code coverage up. Now, I'm not a massive fan of chasing code coverage. The thing is, with code coverage, with unit tests, especially, well, anything really, any kind of testing where you're actually coming up with a code coverage report, it might sound fantastic to get to 60%, 70%, 80%, even 90%. But the thing is that the first 20% is usually low-hanging fruit. It's usually the stuff that is easy to test. And then the last 20% or the last 30% is usually the really difficult things to test. The things that are so difficult that they might actually be untestable. And that's usually a pocket of code smell that you need to refactor to make it testable. So it might sound fantastic to have a really high code coverage, but the code that you haven't covered, however small it is going to be the risky stuff. However, saying that, or the flip side of that, of course, is the higher the code coverage, the more deprecations you're going to shake out of this tree. And the more knowledge, and knowledge is power, right? So the more deprecations you can find, the more code that you can adjust, the more bugs that you're not going to have to deal with later on, because you are aware of those deprecations because your code coverage is so big. So I pushed it up to 70%, and it was a bit of a chore to do that. We were going into some of the difficult parts of the code, especially the stuff around the database. So testing the database is never easy. So we've got something in the region of 400. Well, at the moment we have something in the region of 420 tests. These cover the unit tests. There's about 300 of those, I think. Then there's API tests. So these are testing the APIs and checking the responses and all of that jazz. Then we've got integration tests. So these are testing the integration between the system and external systems, say for instance Ghost, or say for instance Stripe, or what have you, and also the integration of the database itself. But we've also got acceptance tests, and these are tests we do now. These are tests that cover the CMS. So I spent a bit of time going over some of the areas that I kind of really wanted to get to grips with in terms of my testing. That took a bit of time, but I was able to capture deprecations that I didn't have before. And these deprecations, because I was fixing them and changing the classes and changing the methods and all of this stuff based upon what those deprecation warnings were, that meant that when the upgrade happened, I wouldn't have to deal with random broken code because those classes were adjusted, or those methods were adjusted. So that was good. So that was the planning phase. So lots of planning, lots of deciding the risky parts, getting the code coverage up, just sort of getting myself all G'd up for this upgrade. And then came the research phase. So we know that I needed to do the upgrade specifically because of the user sort of side of the things, but what else needed to be upgraded? So I went through all the packages that I had, and then I had a look at if they were compatible with Symfony 5, because obviously you don't want to just suddenly do an upgrade and then realize, one of your bespoke packages that you've included hasn't actually been, isn't actually updated or compatible, I should say, for Symfony 5. That would be a blocker. So I did a bit of research to have a look at the packages that I've got versus their own upgrade paths to see if it was in line with this. Of course, Symfony 5, it's huge, right? It's a huge framework, so I didn't have any problems with that, but still, it's very, very good, especially if you're using any kind of like bespoke packages, like I've mentioned, to just check that. And then the things that after an upgrade, what could I do differently? So what could I rewrite just because I've got it to Symfony 5? So there was a couple of things. There's a couple of Jira items that I've got off of the back of this, which is in the cleanup stage, which I'll talk about. And these are things that you do slightly differently in Symfony 5 that you didn't used to do in the versions beforehand. So there's those things, and those things are causing deprecation warnings for the next version. So after the planning phase and after the research phase, we then have a testing phase. So notice at this stage I haven't done any upgrades at all. I haven't done any adjustments. I'm just checking the compatibility of things. The next phase is the testing phase. This is one of many testing phases, and in brackets I've written, can this be done? So you need to have some foresight to actually think, can this upgrade actually happen? Can I actually do this? And the best way to do that is by having some tests, running some reports. It's always good to have some feedback to say, yes, you are ready to do this upgrade. So for example, make sure all the tests are passing. Okay, this sounds obvious, but you want to have, you don't want to be doing an upgrade on a system where you've got tests that don't pass, because you're not going to know whether they work or don't work in the next version, or if the version's changed that. So you want to make sure that you have 100% passing tests in your test suite. That gives you stable ground to walk on, of course. And then I wanted to ensure that all of the APIs were tested. I wanted to ensure that more acceptance tests were added. This is me getting this up to 70% code coverage. And we then created that branch, and also fixed all the deprecation warnings that I could possibly find, and then run the test suite again. Has it broken? And make sure that everything is passing. And at that point, we've got a green light. We're good. We've done what we can in order for this upgrade to happen. Now, obviously, there's other things involved, like backing up the database and other bits and pieces like that, which is just usual stuff. So I won't talk about that, but that's just everyday bits and pieces: backing up the assets, backing up the code, backing up the database. Because, who knows, there could be a database change when one of the other packages needs to be upgraded for this. Okay, so after the first testing phase, we then move into the upgrade phase. So this is where we're actually now performing the upgrade. The first thing I did, obviously, because this was blocking the upgrade to Symfony 5, was I removed the FOSS user bundle. And as soon as I removed that, everything broke. Not everything. A lot of things broke. So, for instance, one of the things that I was using and leaning heavily on was the user manager in the FOSS user bundle. If you've ever used FOSS user, that is one thing that is integral in your system. So the FOSS user the user manager deals with things like encoding passwords, deals with things like saving emails, usernames, and all of that jazz. So it's quite integral. So and also the forgotten passwords and all that jazz. So yeah, it's quite a big thing. So I removed that. I ran the tests. A lot of things failed, as you could imagine, but it was very interesting to actually see those failing tests, because it highlighted areas of my code that I didn't necessarily anticipate were actually connected to that to the parts of FOSS user, and it was interesting to see how broad-reaching those things were, or how broad-reaching I allowed my code to be. That also highlighted some code smells, because there were some things where I was doing some dependency injection in the wrong way. I was injecting some of the bits and pieces from that bundle, whereas what I should possibly be doing was creating some adapters and adapting into that, or for some facades or something like that, or just putting in the interface, So it was highlighting all those bits and pieces. So after I removed the FOSS user bundle, I then quickly upped all of the package constraints of Symfony in composer.json to Symfony 5.1. I then ran the upgrade again. I had to do this a couple of times because there were things that other packages that were preventing this from going up, so I had to adjust those too. So every time I was running this, I was coming up with some issues, and the Composer's fantastic. It tells you, why, it gives you a suggestion as to what to do. So I was following those suggestions, and 4 or 5 times I kind of tripped up on that. But eventually we got it all the way up to Symfony 5.1, which was great. Obviously the FOSS user didn't exist anymore. So once we got to that stage, we then ran all the tests again. That was my new sort of benchmark to see the amount of bugs or the amount of failing tests that I needed to fix. However I dealt with the replacement of FOSS user, those had to be fixed. So this was the longest part of this journey, the upgrade phase, because I ended up having to rewrite a load of stuff, and we were just fighting through the tests. I think we had something in the region of 70 failing tests. And it was one of those things where you would fix one bug and 10 issues would just suddenly disappear. Or you fix one bug and then you would get another 20 issues. So it was one of those sort of whack-a-mole type affairs, but we managed to get it down. And in fact, the last 2 bugs were the most difficult bugs out of them. But that was okay. I managed to do this in approximately 110 file changes. That's how big it is. That includes the testing as well. So that was how brutally large this change was, which it's kind of, thinking about it now kind of just highlights how broad-reaching this was, and how probably this could have been handled better if I was to create certain services for this. So I wasn't relying strictly on the FOSS user bundle. I was, like I said, using some sort of means of an adapter, which meant that all I would have to do was just change the thing that I was adapting to, rather than the adapter itself. Anyway, so once the upgrade phase was done, which took a long time, but once we managed to get all the bits and pieces rebuilt, it was then time to then do another testing phase. So once the upgrade has been completed locally, I then had to run all of the tests again. And then once they all passed, I then did some manual testing. And this was kind of like just clicking through the content management system, clicking through the front end, that kind of stuff, making API calls with Postman. And lo and behold, there were issues. Now, we managed to get 100% passing tests, but I was still finding issues. And this was highlighting the fact that my tests weren't good enough. The 422 tests I had on the system were not defining the specification of the code correctly. So this meant that there was 2 options. I could either just fix the code and not have the tests test that code, or I created a test to replicate that broken feature, and then I fixed it, and then I reran the test, and if that passed, that would verify that I fixed that. That's what I did. That's another reason why it took a little bit longer than I would have liked, is because the amount of things that I found manually that were broken, that my tests didn't have. And I tell you what, one thing that really tripped me up in this whole process was the configuration. The configuration of that bundle and the configuration of Symfony itself. Because you can't really, when you're doing unit tests and when you're doing even API tests, if you're not really doing a full acceptance test where you're touching the whole thing, the whole broad sweep from controller down to view, if you're not doing that, you're not actually including all of the configuration. You're not building the cache. You're not, there's lots of things you miss out from doing unit tests and API tests. So the manual test, the eyeball test, the clicking through the pages, that proved a lot of things came out of the woodwork with that, which I ended up having to write a test to make sure that was actually, I was replicating that issue, and then I would fix the code, and then I would run the test again. That test would pass, and there we go. So we started this process with about 375 tests. We now have 422 just because of that rinse and repeat process. But now I can say that I'm confident with the code now, because I actually have the ability to run those tests and that they all pass, which is all good. So I've got a note here: finding issues and writing tests to replicate the issues automatically. Use this time as a means to harden your testing suite. So once that test was done, bearing in mind we're still in this isolated branch, which is our upgrade branch, it's now time to merge this branch into the main branch. And luckily it was a one-to-one, right? Because, obviously this upgrade branch had a higher commit number than the main branch, but there was nothing, I didn't add anything to the main branch during this process. But imagine, if you will, you were working in a team and the main branch was going in one direction and the upgrade branch was going in a different direction. And then you had to bring them all together. At this point, you would have to do a merge of the main branch back into your upgrade branch, run the tests to bring it up to speed, and then do the merge from your upgrade branch into the main branch. So your main branch would be at the point of the upgrade. So yeah, I did all that, and then I did some more testing. I ran the suite again once it was all on the main branch. Ran the suite again, everything was fine. I then just decided to do some more manual testing, and that proved okay. And then, because we have the headless CMS, what I did was I rebuilt the front end locally. And then I did some manual testing on the front end, because obviously the Symfony, the APIs all changed, the CMS had changed. I needed to rebuild the front end to just make sure that it was still rebuilding correctly. As I mentioned, it's running in Gatsby. So it was making API calls as the Gatsby site was building. So I needed to make sure they were okay. And then came the deployment phase. So once I had the green light, I gave myself the green light with on local. Once the main branch was up to date with the upgrade branch, once all the tests were passing, once I was able to do some manual testing, click through the pages, run some API tests manually. Once I was happy with all of those things, it was time to deploy. So the first thing I did, as I mentioned, we have this staging sort of environment. I pushed it up to staging just because I wanted to make sure that there was nothing wrong with the deployment itself. So there's a deployment script. All of this is done in Ansible and Terraform. But there's obviously code as configuration, in the sense of you've got your configuration variables, your environment variables, all of those kind of things. Luckily, there wasn't any change to those, but those could be wrong. So I deployed to the staging. I then found, unfortunately, some issues with the config, which I had to fix, and then I redeployed. I then made sure the config was correct on beta, and then I deployed from local up to beta, and then I just immediately did some manual testing, and everything seemed okay. Everything seemed fine. And it was one of those sort of pinch yourself kind of moments. It felt like I had walked this very steep hill, and I just had got to the top, and it was like, wow, did I actually do that? So that was the phases, that was the process. And obviously this is still on beta, it's not on production yet. So production is still running Symfony 4.4, and beta is running Symfony 5, but it's pretty much ready to rock, ready to go. With beta, I want to give it some more time, just to, for people to get some eyes on it and to test it a little bit more. But I'm fairly happy with it. There's other bits and pieces that I need to do outside of this before I actually get this up to production anyway. So that's fine. It probably won't happen for another week or two. I'm a freelancer, so I have a lot of stuff that I do during the day, which isn't anything to do with How to Code Well. It's to do with my business. So time is very, very short. So when I say it takes me a day to do something, that's actually split over many evenings. So it doesn't actually take me a whole 24 hours or a whole 8 hours of a day. It takes me several hours over several evenings, but then sort of that's worth a day's work, I suppose you would call it. So now I want to talk about some unforeseen changes. So this is areas that areas of the deployment process, the upgrade process that I never thought I would need to do. And it was one of those. There was some of these moments where I was like, "This was a bad idea. This was a bad idea. I shouldn't be doing this." So one of the things that I needed to do was I needed to install some PHP extensions onto, because I didn't mention this first, but all of this is done in Docker. So you've got Docker containers for all of these things, right? And so we've got obviously a Docker image, and we have these the images using the multi-stage builds in Docker, and I needed to have an extension for the HTTP exceptions because there was a change, I believe, in Symfony 5 that wasn't in Symfony 4, and I needed to anyway. I needed to have some PHP extensions installed. Unfortunately, these extensions were through PECL, which is a pain to install. If you're installing any extensions, then PECL is just painful to do, because you need to install dependencies, you need to install libraries. So there was a massive change to the Docker image itself, which meant that I had to rebuild the containers, do a complete refresh of the containers on beta, which is what I'm going to have to do on production. So that was painful. That took a long time to just sort of get right. So these extensions required libraries, so the Docker image needed to be rebuilt. And also FOSS REST, I'm using that as well as an extension here. That the config there changed in Symfony 5, and so I needed to rewrite the exception handler. Okay, I'm going backwards here. So, sorry. FOSS REST needed to change because of the configuration, and that meant that I had to rewrite the exception handler, which meant that I needed to have these extensions. That's the flow of it. So it was kind of one of the. It's like a domino effect. So you knock a domino, and then suddenly all these dominoes fall over, and you have to sort of stack them back up again. So yeah, FOSS REST needed changed due to the upgrade, and then there was a lot of leftover FOSS user bundle configuration that I didn't actually get to see unless I did the manual testing. Lots of YAML, lots of Twig stuff that I wouldn't necessarily see through maybe an acceptance, through an API test. So they only came apparent to me through manual testing. There were some other issues as well. Lots of things that unfortunately I don't have my PHP debugger working on the laptop at the moment. I'm using PHP Storm, and I haven't got that working at this present second because it's adjusted to another project. So I need to readjust it to the project to How to Code Well. But as I mentioned, I'm a freelancer, so most of my gear is geared towards the freelance projects, not How to Code Well, unfortunately. But it would be beneficial to get that debugger working, because there was a lot of things I was doing, a lot of embarrassing things I was doing. I was doing var dumps in API calls just to get back the data. Whereas what I should have been doing is using a remote debugger and running through sort of Xdebug and stepping through that way. But as I mentioned, I don't have that set up yet. So what would I do again? If I was to do this again, which I will do, obviously, I need to upgrade to Symfony 6 whenever that comes out. What would I do again? So the first thing I would definitely do is have more CMS acceptance tests. Definitely. Even if they're just light tests, like just checking the status code to make sure that they're 200 okay, or whatever they should be. If they're 500 or 400, that's a massive issue. So even if it was just touching a page, crawling a page, checking the status code, that to me is a good test. And then obviously have a higher code coverage. This is because I think I did a video a while ago where I said that you shouldn't be chasing code coverage because, as I mentioned, you have the last 20% of your code coverage is going to be far more difficult than the first 20% of your code coverage, because the last 20% of your code coverage is going to be all the code that is very difficult to test because perhaps it's untestable, because it's a code smell, it needs to be refactored. However, I'm now changing my opinion on that. Yes, that's the statement is correct that it's the last 20% is more difficult than the first 20%, sure. But the statement of not chasing code coverage, not chasing 100% code coverage, I think I'm going to change. I don't think 100% code coverage gets you into this false sense of security. You know, all of my code is tested, therefore I'm not going to get any bugs. That's certainly simply not the case. But the more code you can cover, the more deprecation warnings you can see, the less stressful the upgrade is going to be. So we've now got it to about 70% code coverage. I would love it to be 80%. I would love it to be 90% or more. I did say that I wasn't going to do an upgrade until it got to 80%, but I really couldn't hold this off, unfortunately. And also another thing that I would do is get my debugger fixed. I shouldn't have done any of this without a debugger. I would have saved a lot of time if I had spent a day fixing my debugger. I would have probably saved a day in fixing bugs and doing var dumps and all of this stuff in API calls, all that ridiculousness. And I guess this really highlights why testing code is good. Testing code is really, really beneficial. So, excuse me, let me grab a drink. So I'm going to answer some questions that I have on the chat here. Do you think people who have started learning Laravel, is it worth it to switch to Symfony due to job offers in their countries? I mean, I'm worried if you spent your days at grinding and it will be useless. Yeah, so you'll see on lots of YouTube channels, you'll see, that's a very good question. You'll see on lots of YouTube channels, lots of people saying, you should learn this, you should do this, you should, I don't really like that because a lot of the times people don't take into consideration the circumstance and also the culture of where that person is. It's not the same everywhere, right? And it's very different in different regions. Like even in the UK here, it's more PHP down in the southwest. It's probably totally different up in the north, and also in different industries. So, for instance, it's more Python based in fintech, and more PHP based in e-commerce, and more Python-based in security. So it's very, very different. But we're talking about Symfony and we're talking about Laravel. The thing is, my opinion is that do whatever you think you're going to get the job for. If you know Symfony, you obviously know PHP. If you know PHP, you're going to be able to pick up Laravel very quickly, and vice versa. The two things translate very easily. So if you're just learning to code at this present moment, I would just pick one. It doesn't matter if it's Laravel, it doesn't matter if it's Symfony, but I would take a temperature check of the surrounding market and see, what kind of e-commerce companies that are around you, or whatever companies that you want to get into this industry, and get a temperature check on whether or not they are Symfony based or Laravel based. It makes sense if all the companies around you are primarily Symfony based. It makes sense to make that switch to Symfony. If, on the other hand, they're mostly Laravel based, it makes sense to continue with Laravel. The thing is, the biggest challenge any new developer has, one of the biggest challenges, there's loads of challenges of course, one of the biggest challenges is to get your foot in the door, get your first job. So you want to be learning something that a lot of people, a lot of companies around you are already using. In my opinion, that just makes sense. So due to job offers, yeah, definitely. There's no point in learning something that you're not going to ever get a job in, right? Or get a job in your first place. But as I said, I mean, I've been a PHP dev for about 20 years. So once you know PHP, you can quite easily pivot and shift to different frameworks. At the moment, I'm probably working on about 2 or 3. So it's but getting the first job, getting the first thing on your CV is very, very important. So you want to be doing, you want to be working on a framework that is very popular in wherever you're first getting your job. It's very different in different regions, very different in different countries, and it's the same in any language. Certain places prefer Django to Flask, for instance. But yeah, that was a very, very good question. So I've got 2 announcements to make. The first one is that next Thursday I will be speaking at Drupal Yorkshire. That's Thursday the 15th, and I'm going to be talking about Docker multi-stage builds. I will talk about this more on the podcast after that talk, and I'll provide my slides and everything like I normally do. And also the second one is that there is a 20% off at the moment at How to Code Well, the merch shop on Teespring, using the discount code OCTOCODA, OCTO, and then CODA. So you can get 20% off the merch there if you go to howtocodewell.net/shop/merch. Right. Thank you ever so much for watching. I'm going to shoot off and this has been weird. This has been odd doing this live, but I've enjoyed it. If you've got any more questions, though, please let me know. Put your thoughts down in the comments if you've got any. If you've also got a suggestion for other topics as well, then please do let me know too. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Happy coding, everybody.